Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to our study this morning. Our Bible study, we're going to be studying Ezekiel chapter 27. If you recall, chapter 27 is the second of three chapters about the Lament of Tyre and the Lament of King of Tyre. All three of those chapters, 26, 27, and 28, are kind of linked together around that topic of Tyre. And we're going to start out today with a presentation of the city. It's in the first 9 verses. We're going to see what Tyre looked like, how we talk about it being arrogant. We're going to see how they look, how they thought of the city, how they presented themselves, and you'll be able to see how their arrogance and their pride played into their problems. So let's start with the first 3 verses. Let me read those. This is about the presentation of the city. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, take up a lament concerning Tyre. Say to Tyre, situated at the gateway to the sea, merchant of peoples of many coasts, this is what the sovereign Lord says. You say, Tyre, I am perfect in beauty. Pretty strong statement. Okay, he says here, he says, take up a lament. A lament is a dirge. It's a lament. It's usually part of a funeral service, or it could be thought of as an elegy. It's normally it's also refers to the lament for the dead. Tyre was situated at a strategic location for both trade and military purposes. Verse 3a, the very first part of 3a, let me read that again. It says, say to Tyre, situated at the gateway to the sea, merchant of peoples on many coasts, because God had situated them at the gateway to the sea. It's kind of like the sea is kind of the highway of trade. It's the way people got around, the way they carried their goods and things that they wanted to trade. Because God had situated them at the gateway. The gateway is where you enter into, okay? So because God had situated them at the gateway to the sea, where in such a place, the city naturally would have built up anyway. That's where people came. They were at a strategic location. And yes, it had gifted leaders, but the gifts were given by God. We need to remember that. Not just for Tyre, not just for our Bible study today, but we need to think of that for ourselves. Sometimes we can get to a point where we kind of start thinking about ourselves a little too highly without giving recognition to God where our gifts and our talents came from. As it happens with success, arrogance and pride often follow even a godly man. At some point in his career, he may begin to feel that he was successful because of himself, because he was so good at what he does rather than what God gave him. God does bless us with talents, and we do appear to be better at some things than other people. But nevertheless, those talents came from God through his grace, and we have certain responsibilities that go along with that. One of them is to recognize God, our source. Okay, the last part of verse 3, along those lines, let me read it again. The last part of verse 3 says this. This is what the sovereign Lord says. You say, Tyre, I am perfect in beauty. In other words, they say of themselves, Tyre says of himself or herself, I am perfect in beauty. They considered themselves as a model of perfection. perfect in beauty. This was also used to describe the pride of Jerusalem, and it was done so in Lamentations 2:15. Let's not forget, we were talking about Tyre. Tyre said, I'm perfect in beauty. Now, if you go to Lamentations 2:15, this is talking about Jerusalem. All who pass your way clap their hands at you. They scoff and shake their heads at daughter Jerusalem. Is this the city that was called the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth? They're scoffing, but they're using a phrase that Jerusalem used about themselves, perfect in beauty. So both of those, that phrase used by both of these cities is born out of pride and arrogance. They're saying, I am perfect in beauty. I am perfect. I am beauty. So they were set up for judgment and destruction to be pronounced by God. All right, let's look at 4 through 9. We're still talking about the presentation of the city. The lament compares Tyre to a magnificent merchant ship. So we're talking about a metaphor here. We need to read it into this as we go. But it's a comparison of Tyre to a magnificent merchant ship. So let me read verse 4. Verse 4 says this: Your domain was on the high seas. Your builders brought your beauty to perfection. Your builders brought your beauty to perfection. We're talking about the city of Tyre, but is being compared to a perfect ship. Okay, so we're going to be reading this, and it sounds like you're reading about a merchant vessel, but we're actually talking about a city where trade takes place. All right, let me read verses 5 through the first part of verse 9. They made I didn't read verse 4, but verse 4 said this: Your domain was on the high seas. Your builders brought your beauty to perfection. Then verse 5, your builders, that would be your city leaders, brought your city, the beauty of your city to perfection. Then 5 through the first part of 9 says this: They made all your timbers of juniper from Senir. Senir is a place. The juniper came from that place. They took on cedar from another place, the cedars of Lebanon, to make a mast for you. So we're talking about the ship. They use this special wood, a better, higher quality, more important, more recognizable wood for the mast. Okay? Verse 6 says, Of oaks from Bashan, they made your oars. So again, they're using some wood from another special place. Of cypress wood from the coast of Cyprus. So they got their cypress they used in their building process from another special place. They made your deck adorned with ivory. Verse 7, fine embroidered linen from Egypt was your sail. So you get this mast made out of special wood. You get this sail made out of special linen. But nevertheless, we've got to keep in mind this is a metaphor. We're talking about a ship. We're talking about a city, but we're comparing it to the characteristics of a ship. Your fine embroidered linen from Egypt was your sail and served as your banner. Your awnings were of blue and purple from the coast of Elisha. Verse 8, men of Sidon and Arvad were your oarsmen. Your skilled men, Tyre, were aboard as your sailors. Then the first part of verse 9, veteran craftsmen of Byblos were on board as shipwrights to caulk your seams. All right. If you were building a city of great wealth, you would need the best of everything And those are the things listed in these verses. You're building a city. You're building a ship here as a metaphor. You're building a ship. You want it to be the finest ship. So you use the best of everything. And these were the things. So we're talking about a city. It's the same principle. We're using the best of everything to build this city, modeling, molding our appearance to perfection, our beauty to perfection. Then the last part of verse 9 says this: all the ships of the sea and their sailors came alongside to trade for your wares. So the ship, you got a just gigantic, beautiful merchant ship out there in the middle of the ocean, and these other ships wanting to do trade with this ship pull alongside, and you do your business right there. Now, this ship was perfect and drew ships of other nations to trade. They were not really trading from a ship, but from the city of Tyre. So I think this could be likened to the ships of the sea using the ports of the city from which to trade. So they pull alongside the merchant ship in the middle of the ocean to do their trading business. The reality of it is they pulled into the ports of the city to do business with the merchants of the city. Okay, verses 10 through 24 enter into a new part of the presentation of Tyre. This is about the significance of the city of Tyre, verses 10 through 24. Let me read verses 10 and 11. Men of Persia, Lydia, and Put served as soldiers in your army. They hung their shields and helmets on your walls, bringing you splendor. In verse 11, men of Arvad and Helek guarded your walls on every side. Men of Gamad were in your towers. They hung their shields around the walls. They brought your beauty to perfection. Very interesting. These are mercenaries. You got the city of Tyre, but they hire these other guys, other fighting men from other places to come into the city, live there, and work there, and protect us from there. Protect the city of Tyre from there. They were hired to defend Tyre. Notice that even the armaments are elevated to perfection. They use the best armaments to provide the best protection for the best city. All right, let's look at verses 12 through 24. We're going to do a lot of reading here, but this is interesting because it's going to show a list of 20 nations having direct trade relationships with Tyre. These are the types of countries that did business with Tyre and the kinds of things that they traded. And if you notice, these are all special things. Special. And some of the nations here I think is interesting. Some of these nations that were trading with Tyre are some of the nations that come against Israel in the last days, or on the last day. All right. 12 through 24. Just let me read these. Keep all that stuff in mind as I read. Tarshish, these are all places some of you are going to recognize because they go by the same name today that they did back then. But they're all real places. Tarshish, for example, was a community in Lebanon. And then there's other places. I don't know whether Greece mentions Tubal and Meshech. There's lots of places mentioned. I couldn't tell you where they are, but they were all real places that did business with Tyre. Verse 12, Tarshish did business with you because of your great wealth of goods. They exchanged silver, iron, tin, and lead for your merchandise. Greece, Tubal, and Meshech did business with you. They traded human beings and articles of bronze for your wares. They were slave traders. Men of Beth Togarmah exchanged chariot horses, cavalry horses, and mules for your merchandise. The men of Rhodes traded with you, and many coastlands were your customers. They paid you with ivory tusks and ebony. Verse 16, Aram did business with you because of your many products. They exchanged turquoise, purple fabric, embroidered work, fine linen, coral, and rubies for your merchandise. Okay, so you're starting to see there's lots of places you don't have the slightest idea, at least I don't, where they're located. But they were real countries. They go by different names today, but they were real countries trading real merchandise, expensive merchandise, hard to find merchandise, important merchandise. Okay, now we get to verse 17. And Judah and Israel traded with you. So you got Judah right down the road. They're doing business with them as well. Judah and Israel traded with you. They exchanged wheat from Minnith and confections, honey, olive oil, and balm for your wares. In verse 18, Damascus did business with you because of your many products and great wealth of goods. They offered wine from Helbon, wool from Zahar, and casks of wine from Izal in exchange for your wares. They brought iron, cassia, and calamus. So you're starting to see they're bringing their stuff in to use as payment to get the stuff that Tyre was trading. In verse 20, Dedan traded in saddle blankets with you. Arabia and all the princes of Kedar with your customers, they did business with you in lambs, rams, and goats. In verse 22, the merchants of Sheba and Ramah traded with you for your merchandise. They exchanged the finest of all kinds of spices and precious stones and gold. Verse 23 and 24, Haran, Cana, and Eden, and merchants of Sheba, Azure, and Kilmad traded with you. In your merchandise, they traded with you with beautiful garments, blue fabric. These blues and purples are symbols of elegance. It's what people with money wore. It's what royalty wore. Okay, they traded with you beautiful garments, blue fabrics, embroidered work, and multicolored rugs with cords twisted and tightly knotted. Okay, this lists 20 nations. I think I already mentioned this once that have direct relationships with Tyre. Some are nations that have the same names today, and some are nations that are going to be the enemies of Israel and Judah at some point in the future. So let's look at verses 25 to 30. It's about the destruction of 25 to 36, which is about the destruction of the city. This magnificent ship of verses 1 through 9 is headed for tragic shipwreck. All right, let me read 25. I'll read 25. I guess I'll just read it all. Then we'll go back and pick the verses we want to look at, which is all of them. That's a good point. You might read, if you're doing your own personal Bible study, you might run across a chapter like this. And there are many chapters that you might feel this way about in the Bible where you're saying, what do I need to read all that stuff for? You got 20 countries here. They were just trading different merchandise with Tyre. They're all different. And there's 20 of them. Why don't I just skip over that? Just say, well, we got a bunch of countries here that they're trading with Tyre, and this is the stuff, that they're trading. And then we go on. I need to remind you, this is in the Word of God. God doesn't put stuff in there that he doesn't want us to be aware of. It may be that for a particular type of study that you happen to be doing at the time, that doesn't need to be studied. But there might be other times where you might need to know what's in that list. I can't give you an example, but I know that I'm telling you right now that it's in there, and I'm telling you right now that it's important because it's in there. So I'm telling you that there's other places in the Bible that are the same way where you're saying, what do I need to know that for? Well, there may be a time where you need to know. It's God's word. He put it in there. So just suffice it to say. So we'll go on, but I just wanted you to, I've told you that many times over the years, but it's just serves as a reminder today. All right, so let me start at 25 and I'll finish out the chapter. And this is about the destruction of the city. The ships of Tarshish. Now remember, this is a metaphor. It's about a ship that's going to sink, but it's a metaphor for a city that's going to be destroyed. All right. The ships of Tarshish serve as carriers for your wares. You're filled with heavy cargo as you sail the sea. The heavy cargo, it's going to make the ship harder to handle. Okay. Your oarsmen take you out to the high seas, but the east wind will break you to pieces. The east wind is what? Babylon. Babylon's going to sink this ship. Babylon's going to destroy this city. Your wealth, merchandise, and wares, your mariners, sailors, and shipwrights, your merchants, and all your soldiers, and everyone else on board will sink into the heart of the sea on the day of your shipwreck. The shorelands will quake when your sailors cry out. All you who handle the oars will abandon their ships. The mariners and all the mariners and all the sailors will stand on the shore. They will raise their voice and cry bitterly over you. They will sprinkle dust on their heads and roll in ashes. That's a lament for the city. It's a powerful city that they did business with, people they worked for, people they served, and they're watching them sink. We'll talk about that in a minute. They will shave their heads because of you. This is more lamentation here. They will shave their heads because of you and will put on sackcloth. They will weep over you with anguish of soul and with bitter mourning. Into verse 32, as they wail and mourn over you, they will take up a lament concerning you. Who was ever silenced like Tyre, surrounded by the sea? When your merchandise went out on the seas, you satisfied many nations. With your great wealth and your wares, you enriched the kings of the earth. Now you are shattered by the sea in the depths of the waters. Your wares and all your company have gone down with you. Verse 35, all who live in the coastlands are appalled by you. Let me go back here. I'm going to say this now. I'm going to say it again in a minute, but I think it's important. Let me read verse 34 again. Now you are shattered by the sea in the depths of the waters. Your wares and all your company have gone down with you. Your wares and your company. You lost everything you had. Your wares and all your company have gone down with you. Everything that means Tyre is gone. All that stuff you were prideful over, all that stuff you were arrogant about, how beautiful we are, how perfect we are, it's all gone. Verse 35, all who live in the coastlands are appalled at you. These are terms of amazement. Appalled, shudder, and distorted. All who live in the coastlands are appalled at you. Their kings shudder with horror, and their faces are distorted with fear. Those are terms of amazement. They can't believe this was Tyre. This was the stronghold of the area, and it's gone. It's going down. In verse 36, the merchants, the merchants are talking about them in a mocking way right here. Now listen to this. The merchants among the nations scoff at you. That's it, using a mocking tone when they talk about you. You have come to a horrible end and will be no more. All right, verse 25. This ship was so magnificent, it traded with the large ships of Tarshish, heavy with cargo. So the ships of Tarshish, there's a reference to the ships of Tarshish at another place in the Bible. It's about the big ship, the big sailing ship. And even Tyre even did business with that kind of company. But the ship breaks up and sinks in the storm from the east wind. I thought you should be reminded again, the east wind is Babylon. That's a metaphor for Babylon, wrecking a ship that is a metaphor for a city. All right, in 28, 29, the mariners watch with mourning as the mighty ship sinks. For if mighty Tyre could fall to Babylon, then we all could fall as well. It's what's concerning them. Tyre was kind of our protector. Now they're gone. I guess we could be next. We're next in the pecking order. Verses 30 and 31. These men exhibited all of the outward signs of mourning. Remember, going back to that, they were bitter, they wept bitterly, cried bitterly. They raised their voices and cried bitterly. They sprinkled dust on their head. They rolled in ashes. They shaved their heads. They put on sackcloth. They wept with anguish and with bitter mourning. They exhibited all of the outward signs of mourning. Then verse 32 and 33, I think I've got is a comment here. It's rhetorical. Who was ever like Tyre? The answer, nobody. Tyre, the most beautiful, the most perfect, the strongest, the most impregnable, the invincible, Tyre. Who was ever like them? Nobody. They were all satisfied with trade from Tyre. Many kings were made wealthy from Tyre. It says there at the end of verse 33, you enriched the kings of the earth. Through your trade, you made them more wealthy. Verse 34 to 36, now the great city is gone, and all are astonished at their wares, and all of your company means everything. Everything that is you is gone. The only reason to think of Tyre was because of their wealth and their strength, and now that is gone. Verse 35 is a sign of amazement, and at the end of Tyre, they can't believe. In verse 35, they shudder in horror, and their faces are distorted in fear. They're thinking, wow, I've said it before, maybe twice already. I'm saying it again for the third time. They are saying, if that can happen to Tyre, what about us? We're a little bitty in terms of Tyre, who's great, big, and strong. We're a little bitty and weak by comparison. If it can happen to them, what about us? Okay, then we get to verse 36, and that's the end of our chapter. The merchants among the nations scoff at you. You know, we've talked about bywords before. Last week we talked about, speaking of pride and arrogance, those were bywords for Tyre. Whatever you thought of Tyre, you thought of pride and arrogance, or wherever you thought of pride and arrogance, you thought of Tyre. In the reality of life, those two things went together. And now people are making fun of them. So you were the merchant among the nations. You come to a horrible end and will be no more. That'll be the end of Tyre. Okay, that's all I have for you today. But next week we're going to complete our study of Tyre. So remember, it's a 3-chapter study. We had chapter 26, which is a lament for Tyre. Uh, Chapter 27 is a lament for Tyre, but it's also giving us a good picture of the city and why they thought about themselves the way they did. All the people that probably to their face would say, "You're the greatest. Man, there is nobody like you," just puffing them up. It makes me think of King Herod in one of the accounts in Acts of him wearing a metallic suit. I believe it was made of silver. Maybe I'm making that up, but it was a metallic suit, and it was so shiny when the sun hit it. The people said, "He must be a god." And Herod didn't deny it. It's like I was talking about before. Every successful person, whether godly or not, may come to a point in his career where he loses sight of where his real strength came from. It came from God, and he starts thinking of himself as being the source of strength and knowledge and talent. Well, and if somebody said something to him about it, he just said, "Well, yep, that's me." Except he didn't even have to say it. He just said, "Well, thank you." He didn't deny it. He took it. King Herod took it when they said he must be a god. And what did he do? He fell off the balcony and died and was eaten by worms. This is the way Tyre is. All these great merchants come in there, Tyre's glad handing them all. They're praising Tyre, trying to get a better price, just telling them, flattering them, telling them all these things about how great they are and how you got the greatest businessman in the world, and Tyre doesn't deny it. Of course, they're ungodly anyway, so why would you think they would? But the point is, they didn't deny it. It's a good lesson for us. Okay, so that finishes chapter 27. Next week, we're going to talk about a prophecy against the king of Tyre. This is very interesting. If you've been in my class, you've seen this before. If you haven't been in my class, you may not have seen it. But we're going to talk about some very interesting things about the king of Tyre next week. Thank you for studying with me.